Today we're going to multiply and divide rational expressions. It's the same concept as multiplying and dividing fractions, but you just have more numbers, letters, and exponents that go with it. Okay, we know that when we multiply fractions, we multiply across and across the numerators and then across the denominators, and that becomes your new numerator denominator. You can reduce before or after you do your multiplication. So let's look at an example. So we have 5 over 9 times 27 over 24, or 27 over 40. We can easily reduce this before we multiply and we have smaller numbers to deal with. We can change this to 1 and 3 and 1 and 8. So now we only have 1 times 3 and 1 times 8. So that's 3 over 8. So let's look at rational expressions where we have more going on than just numbers. You can still cancel first. So let's look at some things we might be able to cancel when we're cross reducing. So we can reduce our 3 and 9. We can also reduce our 2 and 10. And our C's can reduce so that we have a C and a 1. That changes to 1 because there has to be something there. So it turns into just 3 times 1. So it goes away eventually anyways. So then when we multiply across, we end up with 5a to the third power c over 3 times b to the second power. If we put 0 in for our b or our c, then the expression would be undefined. So we know that b or c cannot equal 0. Let's look at another rational, let's look at the steps for multiplying a rational expression. When we're multiplying a rational expression, we're first going to factor all the algebraic quantities in the numerator and denominator. Then we're going to cancel out all common factors, not terms, but factors. And we're going to then multiply across and have our numerators and denominators. So let's look at this example. We can factor out some things here. If we go ahead and break this into two sections, we have an x plus y that are across from each other. And we also have our 2 and our 18. And of course, it doesn't matter which x plus y you use. And then we also have this, which can reduce up and down. So we're left just simply with 9 over x minus y. We had this 1, but 1 times x minus y is x minus y. So now let's look at dividing. If you'll remember, when you divide fractions, you use the first fraction times the reciprocal of the second fraction. So when we look at this, we're going to end up saying x squared over 3y squared times 9y over x, because we have to use that reciprocal. And then we can go ahead and reduce like we have been and multiply across. Now notice we put these y squares written as y instead of y squared, just because it's easier to see which ones, how many can actually reduce. So now we're left with a 3 and 1x on the top and a y on the bottom. Let's look at this one. We're going to first factor what we can. well, we're going to switch our division into a multiplication problem. And then we're going to factor what we can, and we're going to go ahead and reduce what is possible to reduce. So up and down, we can reduce two things that are the same. And across, we can reduce two things that are the same. And again, across, we can reduce two things that are the same. Now we're left with x plus 1 over x plus 1, which is just 1. So because everything has reduced out, we're just left with 1. All of those things, when they reduce, they turn into 1. 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 divided by 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. Okay. Now we're going to look at how we can use this to convert a number with a certain rate into a different rate. So we are going to, you just treat each unit, each rate as its own factor, and you cancel out what you can. So we have 60 miles per hour. And we want to change it into feet per second. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the fact that we want to make sure that our miles are crisscrossed so that they can cancel out. It doesn't matter where at down the line. And now we've converted our miles into feet. We need to do something with our hours because we're looking at seconds. So let's look at, now if we go ahead and reduce, we have 1 hour per 60 minutes. We now can reduce out our hours, and we have 1 minute per 60 seconds. We now can reduce down our minutes. And whenever we just cross off our labels, we can go ahead and just multiply straight across and reduce as necessary. So that turns out to be 88 feet per second. If we divide this, it turns out to be 88. And because we were left only with feet per second, then we're left with 88 feet per second. Okay, go ahead and get started on your homework. It's number 1 through 39 odd.